All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Um, we're just going to wait for people to join. Sorry about being late. We had, surprise, surprise, a couple of technical difficulties. So no Zoom call would be complete without. The other thing that we try to make sure is that at some point, if you're trying to speak, that you're probably muted and someone has to say you are on mute. So between those two things, we should have a very complete and exciting session this morning, this afternoon, or this evening. My name is David Caruso. I'm with the Emotional Intelligence Skills Group. I'm joined by my colleagues, Lisa Reese. Lisa.
Hi, everybody.
Zena Collins.
Hi, everybody.
And we have a special guest today, John Pellitteri. It's a pleasure to have John today. You probably have his bio, but it's I won't read the whole thing. John co-founded and was the past president of the International Society for Emotional Intelligence for a number of years. I think, was it a year or two ago? I think you gave up the presidency, John.
Yeah. Yes, I stepped away.
Yeah. He's also
After 10
a
years.
professor, as well as a department chair, a very, well, I was about to say thankless task, although we're recording this, so I should be careful. It is. It's a tough job to do that at Queens College and City University of New York, and he teaches mental health counselors. He's published a lot on EI, a number of different things. Has written and edited a bunch of books. He's got a TED Talk, runs certification workshops, and I didn't realize in over a dozen countries on every continent. That's impressive. So that's great. He also has a private practice in New York. And, John could talk to us about a couple of things: how to prep to run the New York City Marathon, about running a department, being a department chair. But today, his focus is on emotional intelligence in the creative arts. So without further ado, and it looks like there's a few people trying to log in again and also connecting to audio. We did have some weird Zoom issues this morning, which we've never experienced before. So if you're having trouble, let us know. Also, John, I believe that you will take questions. So what we'll try to do, if you have a question for John, why don't you put it in chat to me or Zena or Lisa, and then we'll kind of raise that as it's kind of fits or doesn't fit into the flow of things. And that might be the best way to do it. So we'll read it. So if you don't recognize you right away, we are reading those comments. So John, thank you so much for joining us.
Okay. David, thank you so much for inviting me. Lisa and Zena, thank you for being here. I was thinking back, David, I think it was 25 years ago, maybe more, when I was consulting you as I was doing my dissertation on emotional intelligence. At that time, you had developed the multifactorial emotional intelligence scale. This was pre-Mesquite, and we were consulted on some of these subtests that I was using for that study. So that's at least 25 years back. So thank you. And yes, I'm John Pellitteri. I'm glad to be here. Thank you again for inviting me. I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence and the creative arts. Before I was a psychologist, I was a music therapist and a music educator. So my roots go deep into music and the creative arts. And it was a natural fit. It was a natural connection. Anyone who's involved in arts, I think you would know this. Even if you just appreciate arts, you don't have to produce them. Just someone who appreciates music and visual arts or dance or poetry or theater, I think anyone can naturally see there's a connection there. And so certainly once I got involved in research in emotional intelligence, I couldn't help but make that connection and say, how do I combine the therapeutic use of arts or just arts in general and combine it with emotional intelligence? In a nutshell, if I had to summarize the bulk of this work, I would say that creative arts naturally and instinctively evoke emotion. I think that's why people are drawn to museums and concerts and theater and things like that. It evokes emotion. And so that's the natural link. So when we use arts, we could use them as teaching tools. We could use them as therapeutic tools. I use them to teach emotional intelligence. I've run emotional intelligence workshops in many different countries, and I always bring in some visual and musical experiences, which we're going to do today. Rather than just be talking about arts and emotional intelligence, let's have an experience here. where we could experience something and then talk about that. So I always bring that into teaching about emotional intelligence. Again, to have something on an intellectual level is one thing, it's necessary, but I think to understand emotions and emotional intelligence at a visceral level, an experiential level, is far more powerful. So I use the arts as a teaching tool. One of the books I wrote was on emotional intelligence and music therapy. It's emotional processes in music therapy. It's the exact title, by a music therapy publisher. And in that, I looked at what is it about music? How does the music actually evoke emotions? Well, music directly affects your heart rate, your breathing, your galvanic skin response, all the physiological bases for an emotion. Okay, and you know, if you're hearing a fast, lively dance music, you want to get up and dance. You want to move. Your heart rate is increasing, your breathing is increasing. You know that if you're hearing a sad a dirge, a funeral music, that lowers your heart rate. It brings down your energy. And if you kind of look at the mood meter, you could almost look at different musics that could evoke different moods in the mood meter. I'm assuming you're familiar enough with that tool that David uses and Mark Brackett uses. So music can have a direct physiological effect on your body. At the same time, then you also have cognitive association. So you combine, you know, the music might evoke a memory or an image. So those elements get combined with the physiological arousal, and they can form the basis of an emotion. If you think of how emotions are constructed, and one of the things I emphasize in that book on emotional processes in music therapy, I looked at a psychophysiological model. So the idea of the psychological part, the cognitive, social, and behavioral parts, and then physiological. All these systems come together to form an emotion. And if we could understand how emotions are created, we have an entry into understanding how we can manage those emotions, which ultimately is a very essential part of emotional intelligence. So I like to use it. And I said that the music is a natural connection with that. It directly affects you. But you could think of visual arts as well. You know, certain colors, certain shapes, designs, textures, anything in the visual arts can certainly impact your senses and create a sensory experience. And then with the cognitive associations and images, it could create a whole emotional experience. I like to think about how we could make an emotion, experience an emotion, and then notice what we feel. Okay, notice what is the senses, what is going on inside us. Another thread that informed me on this connection between emotions and the arts was a program that I was involved in through Queens College, through my university with Lincoln Center in New York City. And there was the Lincoln Center Institute for Aesthetic Education. It was a very innovative and progressive program. And they used the arts to teach, to enhance general education. And so I would bring my graduate students in counseling. We would go once a year to Lincoln Center, and we would have like a preparatory workshop, and then we'd have see a performance, and then we have like a follow-up workshop after that. And the idea is that the arts evoked themes or images or meaning, and we use that to enhance learning. So I will also share a tool I developed that came directly out of the aesthetic education work that I did on understanding emotions from an aesthetic perspective. But I'll get to that in a little bit. Maybe we should jump into some of the activities first. And then we're going to do a visual arts activity. And then if the music works, we'll hopefully do a music activity. And then we'll talk a little more. And then with the remaining time, I'll talk a little bit about the aesthetic representation of emotions, which is a tool I'm developing using the creative arts. So David, if I believe you have the images, if you could share the first one with the ocean, and what the instructions are here is basically, I will take it how we would use it with the aesthetic education training. What do you notice, and what do you feel? Most importantly, what emotions is this image evoking in you? So take a moment or two to look at that, and then we can have a discussion. So if anyone share, I see Sarah has a hand up. So Sarah, do you want to, what do you notice or what do you feel?
I feel a little overwhelmed because I've kayaked in the ocean in weather that resembles this. And sometimes it can be a little overwhelming and sometimes it can be fun, but that's what it reminded me of.
So overwhelmed, maybe fun. I see some of the words. I saw powerful. I saw adrift in the comments. I didn't see all the comments. Thank you for sharing that, Sarah. Someone else, a word or a phrase or a sentence to describe, or even just a sensation. Fear. Someone saying fear. C state. Okay. Yes, fear. Okay. Lack of control. Okay. A lot of the comments coming in. Okay. Oh, someone's not seeing this. Sorry that you can't see that. Anyone else? What do you feel? What are you experiencing? Anyone else want to share that?
For me, John, I feel I was just in the ocean last week, and for me, it was very cold and powerful. There were riptides, and people are saying fear. But for me, just looking at that, it just brings it all back. That danger and darkness and coldness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. A memory. So I don't know. I think Sarah said she kayaks also. So in some cases, it's evoking a memory of being in the ocean. With Lisa, you said it felt cold. That's a sense, right? Sensory recall there. Okay, so it could be cold, it could be dangerous, it could be fear-inducing. Maybe it's fun for someone who likes that. And we're each individual people, so we're going to have our own learning histories, our own sort of storehouse of images and memories that get evoked with an image like this. So we're all going to have somewhat different experiences, but in general, there's a bit of foreboding here, a bit of, it doesn't look very calm. It's not a calm ocean. Now, what is it about the image? There's the association to the ocean, but what is it aesthetically now? What is it about the image itself? What do you notice in this image? Colors, textures, shapes, what exactly do you notice? I can feel the wind and smell the salt with this image. So a lot of sensory images getting evoked. Feel the wind. It's kinesthetic, it's auditory, it's olfactory. Okay. Movement. Yes, movement is a quality here. Arts can create a sense of movement. Cloudy and dense. So the cloudiness, it's a gray sky. There's a density, a thickness here. Now, I expect to see Martha's Vineyard on the other side of the fog. Okay. I hope we get to Martha's Vineyard. I may have missed Lisa or Zine. I don't know if I'm missing some of the comments. I'm not reading every one. So if there's any comments I missed, if you could please share them.
Sure. Yeah, David's saying we need artistic vocabulary to describe this well, but what about monochromatic?
Monochromatic. Okay. All right. It is interesting the vocabulary we use. 3D. Okay. Texture and shades of gray are a little sad, maybe angsty. I like the word angsty. Yeah. So some angst, some sadness. This would be in the red zone of the mood meter, wouldn't you say? It's sort of not leaning towards more of the unpleasant. Blue. Okay. The color blue. Okay. So you can see the different aesthetic qualities. When I talk about aesthetic qualities, color, shades, not much shape here, although the shape of the wave may be untethered. Okay, so the sense of out of control, a lot of movement, maybe some uncertainty. It's kind of gray. Certain qualities and textures of this image are evoking those emotions, along with the memories you might have or images you might have. Even if you never went kayaking in the ocean, you could relate to being in that space. Okay, so the image itself, the qualities, the aesthetic aspects of this art image affect our senses and become the basis for an emotional reaction. Okay, we could sometimes imagine ourselves in there. Okay. So what are the comments or qualities about this? Any other things before we move on to the next image? Okay. All right, David, could you put up that second image I sent? I believe this is the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. So again, how does it make you feel? And what is it about the image that you notice? Calm, nostalgic, peaceful, liberated, or peace, beauty? Zena or Alicia, if I miss any of those, please read them. If I miss any of the things.
Yep, we will.
Expansive. Yeah, go ahead. Oh. Okay. Anyone else? Great memories hiking mountains with my husband and kids. Okay. So it's interesting. In some cases, it could be the image itself that evokes a feeling. In other cases, the image evokes a memory, and the memory has feelings embedded with that. You know, the great time hiking with your husband and kids. It's the feeling about those relationships, about those connections. Anyone else? Any other feelings or sensations that you'd like to share? Okay, so now let's look at the image itself. What are the qualities, the aesthetic qualities of the image? Serene, another emotion, serene. What is it about the image the aspects of the image itself? Textures, orange and yellows together, shades. I don't know if I missed some of those. Layered. Okay. Okay. So again, every image will have a certain degree of color or shading, dimensional. So again, that's more of the structure of it. Calm, that's the emotion associated with it. Okay. Warm. Okay, the colors are warm. Detailed. Yes. Okay. So, David, you could see why I'm excited about the new research on the mesquite with the sensation subtest. How that very much connects to this work here.
Yeah, John, I've been meaning I've been working very hard not to say anything, but
Feel free, please.
I just can't bear it, So the idea, because you're asking two questions, and I tried not to ask this. One is like, what does it evoke from me, right?
Right,
It's
right.
that personal reflection, and as as you're pulling here, it's so individual.
Mhm.
Whether the ocean scene, either excitement or fear, although
Right.
both are energized. It's really fascinating, and I'm trying not to react on an individual idiosyncratic basis.
It's hard not to, though.
Yeah, it's very hard not to, especially when you ask the question. So I just want to point that out. It's interesting. You're looking at a generic response or what it can pull for as humans, but also us. And that personal memory is really, really, really powerful. So just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, thank you. No, art is powerful. We know this. We feel it. It's not just an intellectual knowing, it's an emotional knowing, it's a sensory knowing. So we feel the power in the arts. Interesting, you referred back to the other image, David, like the ocean could evoke fear or it could evoke excitement. So it's your own personal thinking, or personal meanings that could make, hey, I love a challenge. I want the excitement. I can be put me in that kayak. Or no, I'm overwhelmed with this. I got to stay away. So, it evokes something at the same time. It interacts with our personal meanings and memories and images that determine whether it's a pleasant emotion or an unpleasant emotion. Okay. And I chose these obviously as contrast. The ocean kind of evoked more of it's activating a higher energy. Excitement and fear are both higher energies, right? They're different, pleasant and unpleasant, but they're higher energies. The mountain scene, I'm assuming in most cases could evoke a lower energy, calm and serene. Although maybe there's a meaning you have about a distance. So So the idea is that one of the ways that art works on us emotionally is that the aesthetic qualities evoke a sensory reaction in us, and that combines and interacts with memory and images. Okay, and that creates an emotional basis. So if we had a full day workshop here, maybe we would say, okay, you were feeling fear. Where do you feel fear in your body? Is it in your stomach, in your chest, in your throat, in your back? Where are you feeling the fear? What is the meaning? Then we can move from just the sensory, the perceptual piece of emotional intelligence into emotional knowledge. Okay, what creates fear? What is it about the ocean that was making you fearful? Was it it's uncertain, it's movement, what was it that was creating the fear? How do we understand fear? How do we regulate and manage fear? So we could go through each of the abilities of emotional intelligence. And I assume you're all familiar enough with the four main abilities, and the art was a sort of a starting point for that. And same way with the mountain scene, of course, serene. Okay, so where is that in the mood meter? What does serene or peaceful feel like in our bodies? And what images come with us, what memories come with us. So that's at the visual end. That's always easy enough. In a minute, I'd like to go into the musical piece, and it's an work of art. When I worked at the Aesthetic Education Institute with the Lincoln Center in New York City, art was art. They're works of art, whether it's theater, dance, poetry, music, visual arts. They were all arts. So music will have a different quality. Music has its own movement in it. It's a sound medium versus a visual medium. So there's certainly distinctions between the different modalities of art, but art is art. So the music will evoke something, and the same instructions. What do you feel? Or what do you sense in your body? What does it evoke in you? And what is it about the music that might be creating that? So those are the two questions, really. What do you experience, and what are the qualities or the aesthetics in the music? So if we can go to that, and I think the piece is about 5 minutes, so it's okay, we'll play the whole piece. It's one of my favorite pieces. That's why I chose it. Don't worry too much about the vision. Okay, anyone like to share? Not the Appalachia hillbilly I was expecting. Okay. Calm. I think someone wrote, sincere, longing, reflective, breathing slowed, smooth. I thought I'm in the countryside in Ireland. Okay. Melancholic. Calm, relaxing and opening, nostalgic. A lot of deep reflective responses here. Yes, very much.
Scrolling and warm was another response.
Scroll. Okay, yeah, I didn't read every single one, so. Okay. So a lot of associations, some memories for that. Again, more in the maybe the green zone of the mood meter, calm, not intensely activating. Appalachian culture, originally Scottish Irish, interesting. So someone found a connection to Ireland, and there's some historical roots in Appalachia. But I don't know if we have international people here, but Appalachia is a part of the United States, sort of mid eastern seaboard of the United States. It's a sort of beautiful mountainous area. So yeah, the piece was written by Mark O'Connor, and you've probably heard of Yo-Yo Ma, the famous cellist. He's also one of the three musicians there. And I've heard it described more as it's classical and it's sort of country and it's sort of in between and neither of those. So it's really, I find it an exquisitely beautiful, transcendent piece of music for me personally. I get so moved and I feel such deep emotions to that. It's transcendent. So that's why I chose it. It's a very beautiful piece for me. With a lot of reactions. And now, what is it about the music? What was it? Let's look at the aesthetic qualities of the music that maybe are could have evoked that or contributed to our responses.
It's sort of, John, now we need a musical vocabulary, right? I mean, and in order to really appreciate it, that vocabulary, I think, really helps us. And I lack that. I lack the musical vocabulary or just aesthetic vocabulary in general. Just is it? And so when you share that, I know of the piece and I was reading about it before we started our call. And I think, there's, I think it's Mark O'Connor says there's a drone in there or a double, I forgot what the musical references are. And he said Yo-Yo Ma would say he would play this at the end of a Bach concerto, and people would think, "What's one of Bach's pieces?" And Mark O'Connor would say, "Well, I would play this as the end of his own kind of music, bluegrass or whatever," and people think, "Oh, he plays classical music." It's so fascinating, but I'm just thinking again, my own lack of musical knowledge or vocabulary. I wonder if that, I mean, how does that impact your not just perception of the piece, but your ability to, and not just to describe it, but do you think that impacts how we feel it and how we experience it? I've just been
That's
thinking
a
about.
great question, David. Yeah. In what ways does our vocabulary shape our conceptualization or understanding of it or packaging of it? I think we could find a direct parallel to emotional vocabulary, right? Emotional literacy. Quick little story. Years and years ago, I worked with Robin Stern. I think you know her, David. She works with Mark. And we did a program for kids in the settlement house area in Lower East Side Manhattan, near a poor area, special needs kids. And we did a early emotional literacy program. This was maybe the late 90s. And the kids had 3 words: angry, sad, and happy. Or mad, glad, and sad. 3 words. So their emotional experiences were limited by the emotional vocabulary. And obviously, as we expand emotional literacy, we could capture more of the nuances and the subtleties of an actual emotional state. It could become more rich and complex and full. And I think the same would apply to a visual art or a musical art, the qualities, the textures of that. So with music, you have the beat, right? You have the rhythm, you have the melody. Those are the basic elements, the harmonies here. There's actually a version of this piece that's just a solo cello with Yo-Yo Ma, which I find that absolutely beautiful. But this piece here had the 3, the bass, the cello, and violin, so it had more harmonies and nuanced textures. So there's a lot in there. There's a lot, and I agree. The vocabulary does help how we understand it and shape it. And this leads to the last piece I want to talk about, and then we can open it up to questions, the last 10 minutes or so. A combination of violin, viola, and violoncello, the string instruments playing in different, you don't see the whole thing, in different movements. Yes, there's the textures, right? Interesting, the mountain scene, someone said it was layered and textured, the visual mountains we saw before, and the music here was layered and textured as well. the harmonies, as I said, it's slow. Someone said like the notes are elongated, they're long sustained notes versus short little staccato notes that would create a different feeling if it's jumpy or bouncy like that, right? Versus slow and sustained. So again, a musician would have that vocabulary and to what degree we understand that. And it's not as much of being able to describe the aesthetics of the music, but then more importantly, what do those aesthetics do to us? Okay, if you change one element, sometimes you hear like a sort of upbeat pop song, and then you get some pop artist redoes it and they make it really slow and it changes the mood completely. It could be very from almost jumpy and dancing to almost sad or reflective, or so just changing the tempo. One element of it could just change the whole feeling that it conveys and that it evokes. So in that book I wrote years ago, Emotional Processes in Music Therapy, I love writing. I think when I work on a project, it helps me to learn more about it. It's not like I have all the answers and I'm just going to write them out. I'm figuring it out as I go along. I discovered many things in writing that book. And here I'm combining two passions, emotional intelligence and music therapy. I'm combining these two areas in my work, in my life. And so it's really powerful. One of the chapters I did was on the evolution of music and emotions. And interestingly, I wrote this. I have a house in the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York. And so I sat on my deck all summer and wrote this particular chapter, listening to bird sounds all around me and the forest around me. So it was a beautiful environment to create this. So I learned a lot in the process of making the music, making the book. And an idea that came to me, which I then developed into a measure that I'm working on now, is called the aesthetic descriptors of emotion measure. So my reasoning was this: if the arts can create emotions, so there's a correspondence. The music is smooth, the emotion is smooth. The music is slow, soft, and easy. The emotion, whatever we call it, would be slow, soft, easy. So there's a correspondence here between the art and the emotion. And so from the aesthetic education work I did at Lincoln Center, when we would engage in those workshops, we would look at, what is it about the art? Is the music slow or fast, or the melody high or low? Is it smooth? Is it jagged? Are the visual images dark or light? Many colors, many textures? What are the shapes? So you have different words to describe the artwork. Smooth could be musical, smooth could be a movement in a dance. Okay, so there was just certain aesthetic descriptors that were used to describe the artwork. So my reasoning was, well, if we could use these words to describe art, can we use these words to describe emotions themselves? So thus I came with this idea of aesthetic descriptors of emotion. So now we're not describing the artwork, we're describing the emotion itself. So Dave, if you could share that last email I sent, it's a list of words. And this is from the study I've been doing. So let's choose an emotion. How about let's keep it in a positive zone. Let's look at happy. So circle, this is from the actual measure. Circle as many words that you consider to be good descriptors of the emotion, and let's put the word in happy. So go through this list to yourselves, and then I'll ask people to share. Okay, let's pick the word happy. Let's stay with a positive emotion. Which of these words describe or good descriptors of happy? So someone said energetic. You could write them in, or if you want to speak them, whatever you prefer. Melodic.
Someone asked, do you have to choose one per row or any overall?
No, anyone in any order, as many as you want.
Great.
Expansive. Open.
Maybe sweet.
Okay.
Mhm.
I missed one. Energetic, complete, big, warm, bright, moving, inner, complex. I missed one before then. Orange, yellow.
Sarah says, high, bright, fast, moving, simple, yellow.
Okay.
We got an
Everyone
open,
is-
high, energetic, big, loud, warm.
Okay. Now, interesting that in the study I did, so high, bright, energetic, green, outer, soft. In the study I did with the sample, I wanted to see what's the frequency of emotions. First of all, can we just describe an emotion from an aesthetic perspective? Is there a consistent number of aesthetic qualities that seem to be associated with particular emotion? So again, we're describing the emotion. So very similar to the sensation subtest or the synesthesia subtest in the test that David developed, the Mies and the Mesquite. You have to imagine an emotion, and if you're describing the emotion from these different qualities, and it's tying into that physiological level. So very consistently, for happy, high, bright, and energetic came to the top. I think 90% of the people in the sample, maybe 300 people in the sample so far, it's increasing. I'm continuing the study with more increase in the sample, but over 90% said high, bright, and energetic associated with happy. And then there were others that maybe 60 or 70% would refer. So I kind of looked at all the words. Some were not chosen at all. Some were chosen only on a low frequency. Others had a higher frequency of choice. So there did seem to be some very clear aesthetic profile of emotion that emerged. And I used some of the basic emotions: happy, sad, embarrassed, angry. I think I used two others. I forgot the other two. So of those basic emotions, there was some clear aesthetic profiles that certain words rose to the top and were chosen by a large percentage of people. And if you think of it, if you're listening to music that maybe has some high melodic notes, it's a bright timbre, the quality, a tambourine or a drum or a trumpet, a bright timbre, and the music is energetic, it's fast, it's moving. High, bright, and energetic music will likely create a more happy kind of emotion. Think of a marching band or something like that. And interestingly, sad, the three biggest ones for sad were low, dark, and slow for the emotion sadness. And imagine how music that's lower in tone, sort of a dark quality to it, it's moving slowly, might create a feeling of sadness. Think of an image, right? I mean, something low, slow, and dark, among others. Those are the top ones, like 90% picked those words. There were other words. So the different qualities of aesthetics seem to correspond to at least some of the major qualities or the most frequently chosen words to describe particular emotions. Was the word order mixed around during the various tests? Yes. Yeah, there was a different order. So to reverse response, yes, to avoid a response set. Absolutely. And we came up with the same frequencies emerged. It didn't matter what order the words were in. So an interesting correspondence with that emotions can be seen from an aesthetic perspective, as if the emotion is a work of art. Does describing emotions evoke or reinforce them? The next phase of my research is to look at that. I think when you could describe emotions with greater clarity, and I use the scoring based on the Mesquite scoring that David, Jack, and Peter developed. In other words, if the scores that people got, if 90% of the people picked high, let's say, and you picked high, you would get 0.9. And if 2% of the people picked closed for happy, you would get 0.02. So it was all weighted scores, and they took an average of that. So the higher the score on this measure, the closer you were to the norm group descriptions of it. The next phase of my research would be saying, well, how does that lead to the idea of emotional complexity and emotional understanding. I kind of see this as lying between two of the Mesquite subtests, the sensation subtest for sure, but it did have a correspondence with, on the trait meta mood scale, it corresponded with emotional clarity. So I think the better you could describe emotions and the more words you could use and the more nuances you could gather from these words, I think you have a clearer sense. At least the initial research is showing that you had a better sense of emotional clarity with that. And it could be used as a teaching tool. It could be used in many different ways. It could be used in creating artistic works. So we'll see where this can go. It's still an exploratory phase here. But we have about 9-10 minutes left, so I guess we'll open it up to any questions or comments.
John, one comment as well is, I sometimes have used the analogy of how do you describe a nice bottle of wine? But you can do it with so many different things. And if you know somebody who's good at it, they'll say, do you notice I can't even fake it, the bouquet, or there's a hint of, of lemon. Do you get like, well, no, I didn't notice that until you just mentioned it. And now it's like, oh, wow. And it's true for so many of these aesthetic experiences that sometimes it's not seen as an aesthetic experience, or just culinary arts. There's a hint of, it's actually smoky paprika, isn't it? Do you get, and that gives that little, so yeah. I'm also thinking, John, of is it Lisa Feldman Barrett who talks about emotion granularity?
Yes, I refer to her work in this. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that this is, emotional literacy is so important because it does give you a totally different appreciation. I think understanding accurate perception and an appreciation of a more of a lived, richer inner emotional life. It's a shame we don't do more with it. But
One
maybe
way,
the next time you could talk about wine
well, but it's
or
interesting.
beer.
Someone told me once they took a wine course, they learned the wine literacy, and they had a much deeper appreciation. Exactly what you're saying. But you have a better way to. So I think here's where the aesthetic literacy here, or the aesthetic language, is enabling us to understand the emotion in a more granular way and complex and nuanced way. An example of how I've applied this in my clinical work, one of my psychotherapy clients, he had difficulty labeling his feeling. He felt something. He clearly had something. But he wasn't. So I said, all right, let's not try to find an emotion label. Let's just try to describe the sensation and describe the experience. He said, well, it's slow, it's low, it's heavy, it's dark. And it was grief. His mom had passed away. He was an adult male, but his mom had died a few years earlier, and he was feeling the grief of that loss, but he couldn't put it into emotion words. But when we were just describing it, he was able to really have a richer experience. And then we were able to find an emotional label. So you're feeling grief because of the death of your mom. And what helped me as a therapist, I mean, those of you who might work in any kind of clinical area, you want to bring empathy. The therapist or the counselor needs to show empathy for the client. So it helped me, because that's not my work. I'm not that great at empathy, by the way. So it helped me to really say, okay, let me imagine myself low to the ground. It's dark. I'm moving slowly. I feel this heavy weight on me. I'm recreating the sensations that he described with the aesthetic descriptors. It's like, oh, this is not a pleasant feeling, but I could get into the emotional empathy of my client through the aesthetic language. So it helped him in terms of description and labeling and clarity. It helped me in terms of evoking a more empathic response to what he was experiencing. So that's at least one way as a psychotherapist I could see using this, but it could also work in education and other fields.
That's absolutely critical, because in my experience, if you are lacking in emotional empathy, it's really hard to develop that. And so I love that application. We have a question, John, which is, how does emotional clarity correspond to experience?
I'm not sure what you mean by experience, just general experience, or
we'll get a clarification. We'll get some
Okay.
clarity in a
Some
moment.
clarity.
As the
That's clarity.
person who asked the question is, I think you just yeah. So it looks like
I
in
think
your
he's just answered
reply
it.
earlier,
Okay.
you just nailed that.
What
that's
comes to
great.
mind with that is also, if you're clear on what you're experiencing, you can better understand it. You have a label for it. You can understand it. You can work with it. Like my client did not have emotional clarity initially. I feel something, I'm not sure what it is. There's a measure that I've used in some of my studies, the Levels of Emotional Awareness Scale by Richard Lane. And that's great because like the earlier level, like, 0, 1, or 2, it's a physical sensation or it's a vague, I feel upset. What does upset mean? That's very vague. But you ask a kid, I feel okay. What does okay mean? But then you get to level 3 on that scale, I feel sad, angry, worried, annoyed, hopeful. Those are clearer words. When you have a clear emotional label, then you have a greater degree of emotional, and his scale was emotional awareness, but I think it's also a greater emotional clarity. And then you could work with it and understand it better. So I think the aesthetic descriptors measure here could bring people from a lower level of clarity to a higher level of clarity and be in better position to work with those emotions. Other question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just entered, I put a document in chat for people. We'll also send this to you, but it just has a bunch of links. And John, I'm glad you selected something out of YouTube. This way you don't have to worry about copyright and things. So you can, if you're interested in listening to that, if any of you really need to feel depressed or sad or melancholic, just pull up that piece, and I think it'll probably do it for you. You need to be reflective. That should do it.
That's what
But
the conductor recommended to you, David. The
yeah,
orchestral conductor recommended a piece. Yeah.
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is interesting. We've been working, some of us have been working with classical music orchestras and talking about just how powerful music really is and how essential it is to our being and our souls. So John, I've really appreciated your time. Thank you and everyone else for joining us today. We did record this. We might want to pull a few things out, but we'll make that available soon. We do have some calls coming up. We have a question, I believe, if that is true.
Louisa?
Yeah. If you'd like to say something or have a question or
Yes, I thank you for the invitation. Yes, my name is Luisa. I'm from Colombia. And in fact, I would like to share something to you regarding the emotions, because in this moment, I have a company of the fragrances. The importance of the fragrances here, in Colombia, there are many flowers and we have many stories about that. It affects the psychology in the human being, you know. So I would like to share. If you are interested, you can contact me, and we can another meeting about that. The specifically different fragrances for relaxing, for active, and it's very interesting about emotions.
please send it to us. I think we might call it aromatherapy as well. So I really
Yeah,
appreciate that.
yes.
Yeah.
However, the aromatherapy is different. Is
Okay.
a new concept in Colombia. It's like aromatology. Yeah, it's most psychology.
Thank you. Well, thank you for that. And we do have send us some information, please. Our email addresses or in the slide I just popped in. You can sign up for a monthly newsletter, our monthly Zoom calls. We have a Mesquite certification coming up. And if you want to attach, if you want to connect via LinkedIn, we put those things in there as well. And to our sponsor, which is Humble Kind Wise. We really appreciate you coming today. And John, thank you so very much for your generous use of time and sharing some really, really cool ideas. And
Thank
got
you
us
so much,
to
David.
think and to feel, which is a paraphrase of a Jethro Tull song. So for those of you who know Tull, anyway, which is not a bad way to go out on a song. So thanks, everybody. We appreciate it. And let's go out on a song. All right.
Be well.
Bye, everybody. Thank you
everybody.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Nice to meet you. Take care.
Bye, thank you.
See you next
See
month.
you. Bye.
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 Nice.
And John, if you want to give me a buzz, or I know we want to talk about